Hey folks, chapter 3 of Animal Farm today. Last time on Animal Farm, right? Like we had the revolution, the animals almost without knowing that it was going to happen were able to throw Jones off the farm. Mrs. Jones left too, and Moses the tame raven left with them. Now the animals are trying to organize things and work for themselves. They burned a bunch of stuff that they used to control animals. They created the 7 commandments, a list of 7 things that animals must do or must not do. The 7th one was all animals are equal. Then they milked the cows who, like their udders were going to explode if they didn't get milked, and went off to harvest the hay. And when they came back, the milk was gone, and that's sort of where the chapter left. So even at the end of chapter 2, we're starting to see the seeds of something that's not, animalism. That's not all animals are equal going on there. What happened to the milk? Where did it go? Like you all thought about your theories on that last time, but clearly it wasn't shared equally among all animals. So we're going to pick up chapter 3 and see how Animal Farm, as opposed to Manor Farm, is running now. Remember, just before I go, that it's a fable and it's an allegory. You want to keep that allegory with communist Russia in your head throughout. Chapter 3, how they toiled and sweated to get the hay in, but their efforts were rewarded, for the harvest was an even bigger success than they had hoped. Sometimes the work was hard. The implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals, and it was a great drawback that no animal was able to use any tool that involved standing on his hind legs. Remember, that's one of the commandments. But the pigs were so clever that they could think of a way around every difficulty. As for the horses, they knew every inch of the field and in fact understood the business of mowing and raking far better than Jones and his men had ever done. It says something about the peasants and how they understood their own land better than the people who ruled over them. The pigs did not actually work, but directed and supervised the others. With their superior knowledge, it was natural that they should assume the leadership. Boxer and Clover would harness themselves to the cutter or the horse rake. No bits or reins were needed in these days, of course, and tramp steadily round and round the field, with a pig walking behind them and calling out, "Gee up, comrade," or "Whoa back, comrade," as the case might be. Comrade, of course, is a connection to Soviet Russia. Literally, it's a word that means friend. And it shows that they're all equal, right? Like they're all friends in here together. It's no longer master and serf. It's comrade, that language. And every animal down to the... Now, by the way, comrade shares a root with community, which shares a root with communism. And I think those are all connected intentionally so, and you should be thinking about that. And every animal down to the humblest worked at turning the hay and gathering it. Even the ducks and hens toiled to and fro all day in the sun, carrying tiny wisps of hay in their beaks. In the end, they finished the harvest in 2 days less time than it had usually taken Jones and his men. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest that the farm had ever seen. There was no wastage whatever. The hens and ducks with their sharp eyes had gathered up the very last stock, and not an animal on the farm had stolen so much as a mouthful. So that's good. I mean, like the farm seems like it's working out pretty well to this point. Faster harvest, better harvest. The animals / workers are invested in the work that they're doing because it's their own labor for their own benefit as opposed to their own labor for somebody else's benefit. And that seems to matter. All through the summer, the work of the farm went like clockwork. It's a simile. The animals were happy as they had never conceived it possible to be. Every mouthful of food was an acute, positive pleasure, now that it was truly their own food, produced by themselves and for themselves, not doled out to them by a grudging master. With the worthless, parasitical human beings gone, there was more for everyone to eat. There was more leisure, too, inexperienced though the animals were. They met with many difficulties. For instance, later in the year, when they harvested the corn, they had to tread it out in the ancient style and blow away the chaff with their breath, since the farm possessed no threshing machine. It says something about how backward communist Russia was. It doesn't have the machinery it needs to be successful. Let's see. But the pigs, with their cleverness, and Boxer, with his tremendous muscles, always pulled them through. It's a combination of the will of Boxer, who represents the workers, and the intelligence of the pigs, who represent the party members here. Boxer was the admiration of everybody. He had been a hard worker even in Jones's time, but now he seemed more like 3 horses than one. There were days when the entire work of the farm seemed to rest on his mighty shoulders. From morning to night, he was pushing and pulling, always at a spot where the work was the hardest. He had made an arrangement with one of the cockerels, that's a rooster, to call him in the mornings half an hour earlier than anyone else, who would put in some volunteer labor at whatever seemed to be most needed before the regular day's work began. His answer to every problem, every setback was, "I will work harder," which he had adopted as his personal motto. So we're getting some characterization of Boxer the horse. We didn't have a lot before. He came in with Clover during the meeting, and he seemed to care about the other animals and keep them safe and stuff. But here he is, the hardest worker on the farm, always working, always where things are the hardest, never shirking his responsibilities. His motto is, "I will work harder." He gets up earlier than anybody else and puts in volunteer hours. This is something about somebody who's devoted to the cause of Animal Farm, of making it successful. He's willing to put in whatever work is necessary and do whatever he can to help his fellow animals have a successful farm. And a lot of it depends on him. Remember, he represents the workers. And his name says something about him too, Boxer. It sounds like he's a fighter. He's somebody who's going to, and a boxer, of course, would be like a factory worker, somebody who's boxing things up. Like the Green Bay Packers are named after factory workers in sort of the same way. So I think there's something with his name too. Anyway, but everyone worked according to his capacity. Now it's a communist motto, like everybody works according to their abilities. We all get treated equally. We all get equal pay. We all get equal, whatever, but everybody works to their own ability level. Is that fair? That's something that you want to talk about, and that Orwell is trying to address here. How's it fair, for example, that say Boxer, who's a horse, might get the same rations as Molly, who's a horse, and who's doing more work? And is it fair in a society like this that everybody gets treated equally when some people are obviously working harder than other people? This is something that I think that Orwell is trying to get across with the characters, but we'll keep reading and thinking. The hens and the ducks, for instance, saved 5 bushels of corn at the harvest by gathering up the stray grains. Nobody stole. Nobody grumbled over his rations. The quarreling and biting and jealousy, which had been normal features of life in the old days, had almost disappeared. Nobody shirked, or almost nobody. Molly, it was true, was not good at getting up in the mornings and had a way of leaving work early on the ground that there was a stone in her hoof. And the behavior of the cat was somewhat peculiar. It was soon noticed that when there was work to be done, the cat could never be found. She would vanish for hours on end and then reappear at meal times or in the evening after work was over as though nothing had happened. But she always made such excellent excuses and purred so affectionately that it was impossible not to believe in her good intentions. Old Benjamin the donkey seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. He did his work in the same slow, obstinate way as he had done it in Jones's time, never shirking and never volunteering for extra work either. About the rebellion and its results, he would express no opinion. When asked whether he was not happier now that Jones was gone, he would say only, "Donkeys live a long time. None of you has ever seen a dead donkey." And the others had to be content with this cryptic answer. So this paragraph, talks about the various ways the animals are working. Remember that Benjamin the donkey represents the intellectual class. He seems unaffected by the rebellion. It doesn't seem like it's changed him at all. And he doesn't seem to be super excited about it in any way. Because he seems to know his history and understand something that the other animals don't. Donkeys live a long time. None of you have ever seen a dead donkey implies that he's seen a lot of things. Meanwhile, we've got this cat who does no work at all. And the cat is a direct contrast, a direct juxtaposition to Boxer. Look at all the work Boxer's doing. Cat shows up, eats, disappears for work. How does it work in a communist situation where you're all sharing, but somebody's not doing the work? It sounds like group work in class sometimes. Y'all share the grade. Is the work distributed equally? How is it fair? And that's a question you want to look at. And then there's Molly, who represents the upper class and is used to not working at all. And she doesn't want to get up in the morning, and she leaves work early every day because she doesn't usually work. She just occasionally takes Mr. Jones somewhere and looks pretty with her, ribbons in her hair and her sugar cubes. Anyway, on Sundays, there was no work. Breakfast was an hour later than usual. And after breakfast, there was a ceremony which was observed every week without fail. First came the hoisting of the flag. Snowball had found in the harness room an old green tablecloth of Mr. Jones's and had painted on it a hoof and a horn in white. This was run up the flagstaff in the farmhouse garden every Sunday at 8 in the morning. The flag was green, Snowball explained, to represent the green fields of England, while the hoof and horn signified the future republic of the animals, which would arise when the human race had been finally overthrown. Pause. Let's talk about the flag for a second. I'm going to jump over to another file so we can sort of look at some pictures. I think that'll help you. So here we have the flag of Communist Russia, which is a very symbolic flag. Like the major symbols on it is this, which is a sickle, which is used for harvesting hay. So, it's a Soviet Socialist Republic, United Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, and it's a workers' country. And so those are the farm workers symbolized by the implement they were using to harvest the fields. The other symbol on the Soviet flag is a hammer. The hammer represents the workers from the city. So you've got the two symbols, the workers from the country and the workers from the city, united on this flag, which is on a red background. Take a look at the symbolic representation of Animal Farm. It's a horn, which is animals, and a hoof, which is animals, and they're crossed, and they look almost identical, except that this is on a green field. The red here represents, the sacrifice of the people who fought for the party and for Russia, and that kind of a thing. The green here represents the green fields of England, but I think it's worth noting that animals are colorblind, and red-green colorblind is a really interesting thing that people who have that problem can't tell the difference between red and green. So even to the animals, these flags would be very, very similar. I think Orwell is playing on that. So we have this symbolic flag representing different kinds of animals joining together, and the fields of their new country or their new farm, Animal Farm. First came the hoisting of the flag. Snowball had found in the harness room an old green tablecloth of Mrs. Jones's and had painted on it a hoof and a horn in white. This was run up the flagstaff in the farmhouse garden every Sunday at 8 in the morning. The flag was green, Snowball explained, to represent the green fields of England, while the hoof and the horn signified the future republic of the animals, which would arise when the human race had been finally overthrown. So their goal is to get rid of humans entirely, which is the goal of communism, to get rid of the upper class, to get rid of the wealthy, to get rid of those people who are controlling everything with their money. After the hoisting of the flag, all the animals trooped into the big barn for a general assembly, which was known as the meeting. Here, the work of the coming week was planned out and resolutions were put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forward the resolutions. The other animals understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolutions of their own. So who's controlling these meetings? It's clearly the pigs. Snowball and Napoleon were by far the most active in the debates, but it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestion either of them made, the other could be counted on to oppose it, even when it was resolved, a thing no one could object to in itself, to set aside the small paddock behind the orchard as a home of rest for animals who were past work. There was a stormy debate over the correct retiring age for each class of animal. The meetings always ended with the singing of Beasts of England, and the afternoon was given up to recreation. So these political meetings, I think, are interesting because we've got these two leaders who have established themselves, Napoleon and Snowball, Stalin and Trotsky, and they don't like each other. They both want to be in charge, and they disagree with each other on principle, no matter what it is that the other person puts out there. So we're already seeing, we saw the milk incident. Now we're seeing sort of fractures in leadership. All animals are equal, but how does that deal with, say, pride or the desire to be in power and those sorts of things that are not necessarily compatible with perfect equality in this ideal society? The pigs had set aside the harness room as a headquarters for themselves. Here in the evenings, they studied blacksmithing, carpentering, and other necessary arts from books which they had brought from the farmhouse. Snowball, also busied himself with organizing the other animals into what he called animal committees. He was indefatigable, it means not fatigable, at this. He formed the Egg Production Committee for the hens, the Clean Tails League for the cows, the Wild Comrades Re-Education Committee, the object of this was to tame the rats and rabbits, the Whiter Wool Movement for sheep, and various others besides, instituting classes in reading and writing. So Snowball's super busy. He's forming all these committees. They seem kind of funny on some level. He's trying to teach animals to read and write. He's very involved in the farm. On the whole, these projects were a failure. The attempt to tame the wild creatures, for instance, broke down almost immediately. They continued to behave very much as before, and when treated with generosity, they simply took advantage of it. The cat joined the re-education committee and was very active in it for some days. She was seen one day sitting on a roof and talking to some sparrows who were just out of her reach. She was telling them that all animals were now comrades and that any sparrow who chose could come and perch on her paw. But the sparrows kept their distance. The reading and writing class, however, were a great success. By the autumn, almost every animal on the farm was literate in some degree. As for the pigs, they could already read and write perfectly. The dogs learned to read fairly well, but were not interested in reading anything except the 7 Commandments. Muriel, the goat, could read somewhat better than the dogs, and sometimes used to read to the others in the evenings from scraps of newspaper which he found on the rubbish heap. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty. So far as he knew, he said, there was nothing worth reading. That's ironic as we're reading this book. Clover learned the whole alphabet, but could not put words together. Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. He would trace out A, B, C, D in the dust with his great hoof, and then would stand staring at the letters with his ears back, sometimes shaking his forelock, trying with all of his might to remember what came next and never succeeding. On several occasions, indeed, he did learn E, F, G, H. But by the time he knew them, it was always discovered that he had forgotten A, B, C, and D. Finally, he decided to be content with the first 4 letters, and he used to write them out once or twice every day to refresh his memory. Molly refused to learn any but the 6 letters which spelled her own name. She would form these very neatly out of pieces of twig and would then decorate them with a flower or 2 and walk around them admiring them. Pause. So more characterization on Boxer. We had a little characterization on Snowball, like he's very involved in the farm. He cares about the animals. He's trying to improve their lives. Boxer is dumb. He's really hardworking. He's really good-natured. He wants the farm to succeed, but he can't learn to read and write. He's uneducated. And this is a metaphor for, or a symbol for the workers themselves. Like in communist Russia, they really wanted the republic to succeed. They worked really hard. They tried, but they're not educated. They don't have the capability to understand the things that, say, the party members, the pigs, understand. And this is what we're getting at. Molly, who represents the upper class, you can see how selfish she is with her characterization. All she wants to spell is her own name and make it look pretty and look at it. She's only concerned with herself and with how she appears to other people. That's why she liked the ribbons. That's why she does this thing with her name. So she's capable of learning more than Boxer, but she's not interested in learning anything that isn't directly helping her. And if she represents the upper class, that's Anyway, none of the other animals on the farm could get further than the letter A. It was also found that the stupider animals, such as the sheep, hens, and ducks, were unable to learn the 7 Commandments by heart. So sheep are so dumb they can't learn more than A. Same with hens and ducks. These represent the masses, and they can't even learn the 7 Commandments. They've taken animalism and turned it into 7 Commandments. After much thought, Snowball declared that the 7 Commandments could, in effect, be reduced to a single maxim, namely, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. This, he said, contained the essential principle of animalism. Whoever had thoroughly grasped it would be safe from human influences. The birds at first objected, since it seemed to them that they also had 2 legs, but Snowball proved to them that this was not so. A bird's wing, comrades, he said, is an organ of propulsion and not of manipulation. It should therefore be regarded as a leg. The distinguishing mark of a man is the hand, the instrument with which he does all his mischief. The birds did not understand Snowball's long words, but they accepted his explanation, and all the humbler animals set about to work to learn the new maxim by heart. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. was inscribed on the end wall of the barn above the 7 commandments and in bigger letters. When they had once got it by heart, the sheep developed a great liking for this maxim, and often as they lay in the field, they would all start bleating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and keep it up for hours on end, never growing tired of it. Napoleon, actually, we're going to pause there. So, we've reduced the understanding of animalism to a very, very simple saying: 4 legs are good and 2 legs are bad. To let animals know that animals are good and humans are evil. That's going to be important moving forward. But you can see Snowball is trying to explain something to the animals, and he does, and they can't understand what he's saying because they're not educated. They have no intellectual grasp. And so, they just have to accept what he says, whether they understand it or not, which I think is troubling, if Snowball represents the government. Anyway, let's see how Napoleon is as opposed to Snowball. Napoleon took no interest in Snowball's committees. He said that the education of the young was more important than anything that could be done for those who had already grown up. It happened that Jessie and Bluebell, these are the dogs in case you've forgotten, had both whelped soon after the hay harvest, giving birth between them to 9 sturdy puppies. As soon as they were weaned, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, saying that he would make himself responsible for their education. He took them up into the loft, which could only be reached by a ladder from the harness room, and there kept them in such seclusion that the rest of the farm soon forgot their existence. Pause. So the dogs had 9 puppies. Napoleon says the most important thing for our farm is the education of the youth, and he takes on this responsibility himself. He takes these puppies away from their mother and makes himself responsible for their education, and everybody soon forgets about them. That's a commentary on the attention span of the masses. They can't pay attention to something for very long. Maybe they were upset about the puppies for a few days, but eventually it sort of blew over, and now people have forgotten about it entirely because it's not being mentioned. And of course, if you can't read and write, it's all about what's being mentioned. The mystery of where the milk went was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into the pig's mash. The early apples were now ripening, and the grass of the orchard was littered with windfalls. The animals had assumed, as a matter of course, that these would be shared out equally. Windfalls, by the way, like apples grow on the trees, and sometimes a big wind blows through and a bunch of apples will fall out of the tree onto the ground. These apples are collected, and the animals would assume that they're all being shared out. One day, however, the order went forth that all the windfalls were to be collected and brought to the harness room for the use of the pigs. At this, some of the other animals murmured, but it was no use. All the pigs were in full agreement on this point, even Snowball and Napoleon. Squealer was sent to make the necessary explanations to the others. All right. So, our first troubling signs are really starting to come together. The milk is being given specifically to the pigs. It's mixed with the pigs' food. The apples now are being given only to the pigs. And Napoleon and Squealer, and Snowball, who don't agree on anything, are able to agree on this. Why? What's going on here? What's changing on Animal Farm? And does this break any of those commandments? Remember that Squealer represents the state-run media, and so the party, the pigs, essentially are sending him around to make explanations. Now, for the first time, we're going to start looking at rhetoric. Remember, I gave you that rhetoric lesson. We looked at it a little bit with Old Major's speech. Now we're going to look at it a little bit deeper with Squealer. Squealer's a great one to get into. Remember, the rhetorical pyramid has 3 elements, right? We've got ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is, the person in a commercial wearing a lab coat and saying they're a doctor or a scientist. We trust doctors and scientists, and so there's a certain amount of weight that goes behind their words based on the reputation of the person saying it. Pathos is passion or emotion. That would be saying things that make people scared or make people happy or give them desires. These kinds of things are used to manipulate the emotions of the listener. And then logos is logic, using statistics, using logical organization and facts to prove that what you're saying is true and convince them through their logic. So Squealer is going to defend the fact that the pigs are taking all of the apples and all of the milk. And here we go. Comrades, he cried, you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us actually dislike milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole object in taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proved by science, comrades, contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depend on us. Day and night we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake, that we drink that milk and eat those apples. Do you know what would happen if we pigs failed in our duty? Jones would come back. Yes, Jones would come back. Surely, comrades, cried Squealer, almost pleadingly, skipping from side to side and whisking his tail. Surely there is not one among you who wants to see Jones come back. Pause. So, Squealer, what's he doing here to get his message across? First off, he starts out with comrades. Friends, we're all equals here. Then he starts a rhetorical question. You do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Of course they are. But he's like, you can't possibly imagine that we're doing this for our own benefit. Then he says, many of us actually dislike milk and apples, and I dislike them myself. He's like, yeah, we don't even like milk and apples. That's an opinion, but it makes it sound like they're doing it because they have to rather than because they want to. So he structures it in this way. Then he says our sole object in taking these things is to preserve our health. The only reason we're eating the milk and apples is so that we can stay healthy. Milk and apples, this has been proved by science. There's your ethos. Proved by science. Like listen to those scientists. Contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. Here's your logos. Scientists say that, it's absolutely essential that pigs eat milk and apples or else they'll die. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depend on us. And if the pigs were to fail, you guys would all fail and you would all lose and die and humans would take back over because you need us. So it's essential for us to be healthy so that we can keep you healthy. He's putting it all together in this, sort of twisted logical way. So then he says, day and night, we are watching over your welfare. So the idea that the pigs are doing this great thing, they're working so hard day and night. Of course, you go back to that harvest, and what were the pigs doing? They were like walking around being like, gee up, comrade. Like they weren't doing any actual work. Have we seen any evidence of a pig actually working? Do you know what would happen if we failed in our duty? Jones would come back. So we have this rhetorical question. What would happen if we failed? And then he provides an answer. Jones will come back. Yes, Jones would come back. And then he ends with another question. Surely, comrades, surely there is no one among you who wants to see Jones come back. So he changes the terms of the argument. It's not about getting equal rights. Like we all deserve milk and apples. If you want milk and apples, then you're a traitor to Animal Farm. You want Jones to come back. Because via the logic that I've just given you, if you don't give the milk and apples to the pigs, we'll fail, will die, and then you won't be able to defeat Jones on your own. So he's created this argument, and of course, when he puts it that way, remember the animals are not really smart; they're not educated. The pigs are the smart ones. So let's see how the animals respond. Now, if there was one thing that the animals were completely certain of, it was that they did not want Jones back. When it was put to them in this light, they had no more to say. The importance of keeping the pigs in good health was all too obvious. So it was agreed without further argument that the milk and the windfall apples, and also the main crop of apples when they ripened, should be reserved for the pigs alone. And that's the end of chapter 3. So we met Snowball and Napoleon a little bit. We, learned their plans. Snowball is busy with committees. He's busy trying to improve Animal Farm, make the animals educated, all these kinds of things. Napoleon took away the 9 young puppies into the barn to educate the youth. They're arguing on things. There seems to be some sort of a leadership struggle going on between the two of them. And the only thing they agree on is that the pigs should have all the milk and all the apples. And so the equality, all animals are equal of Animal Farm, seems to be in question here. But let's move on to chapter 4. I will start a new video on that so you don't have to watch them all at once and you can split them up.